Yeah, I guess some people, when they go to college, they're not really sure what they want to do. That was never really a problem for me. I always knew what I was going to be doing. Wasn't really set up for doing anything else, honestly. So yeah, that was just one goal always, and that was working in the conservation field. So my name's Mark Dodd. I'm a wildlife biologist with Georgia Department of Natural Resources, and my primary responsibility is sea turtle conservation. So on the Georgia coast, loggerheads are our primary nesting sea turtle. This is a loggerhead skull. It's a pretty big animal, 200 to 300 pounds. You can tell a lot about an animal based on its morphology, the way it's built. And so loggerheads have this large skull that's with very powerful jaws that are made for crushing the organisms they eat. They eat a lot of invertebrates, whelks, shells, and crabs. So yeah, loggerheads have a really amazing life history. They nest on our beaches, hatchlings emerge, they make their way into the ocean, and they leave here. They use the whole North Atlantic at some point during their life history, and then ultimately come back to nest on the beach where they were originally hatched 30 to 35 years later. We have a long history of sea turtle conservation in Georgia. One of the first nest protection and management projects for loggerheads in the world was started on Little Cumberland Island in Georgia, and that was back in 1964. Dr. Jim Richardson was a professor at the University of Georgia, got interested in sea turtles, came down here, started doing some work, and realized that the population was declining pretty dramatically. So it was in need of some pretty intensive management to recover it. At one point we were down to less than 400 nests in the state, and last year we had a record nesting year of just over 4,000 nests. We have probably another 20 years of fairly intensive management to get to the point where the population will finally start recovering back to the levels it was in early 60s. Well, so the primary threat to loggerheads on the Georgia coast, and one of the main reasons they declined so dramatically, was the shrimp trawl fishery. And sea turtles breathe air, and if they get caught in the net, they can't get to the surface to breathe and they drown. And so a local fisherman named Sinky Boone, he's from Darien, he developed a device called a TED, a turtle excluder device. It's a metal grid that's sewn into a shrimp net at about a 55-degree angle, but the turtle hits the grid and is sort of pushed toward either the top or bottom of the net, and there's a hole cut in the net with a flap, and they're able to escape. Last year we boarded a lot of shrimp trawlers, checked TEDs, and had only one serious violation. So that's really almost 100% compliance. So that's excellent. And that's been a big part of the recovery actions. Another primary threat to loggerheads in Georgia was unrestricted dredging of channels with hopper dredges. And they go into the ship channels in St. Mary's and Brunswick and Savannah, and they just suck up all the sand and mud that accumulates in the channel. Unfortunately, they also suck up turtles. So hopper dredging was restricted to just the winter months because turtle abundance is determined by temperature. They're less abundant in the winter, and the mortality was much lower. But more recently, the Corps of Engineers is interested in trying to dredge during the summer again. And so that's an emerging threat that we're certainly dealing with now. So every morning on the Georgia coast, we have at least one team on our Barrier Island beaches out serving for loggerhead nesting activity. On a crawl in the morning, this is a typical loggerhead crawl that we see in front of us here. When they come up the beach, they use alternate flipper strokes. And so when we look at this crawl, we can see very clearly here alternating flipper strokes. So this is a loggerhead turtle. We make our way up here to the drier upper part of the beach, and we find where the turtle nest is. This protective screening on the nest, this is what we use to protect the nest from predators. We're only relocating nests when we feel pretty confident it's going to be washed over. We're just trying to leave as many nests in place as possible. I mean, ultimately for me, having worked in the conservation field for 35 years at this point, I was really lucky to work in a place here on the Georgia coast that people before me had the foresight to protect. It's a wild place with a lot of diversity in wildlife. This is the place that right whales come to calve, to give birth. The North Atlantic right whale is the most critically endangered of all the big baleen whales in the world. For best we can tell, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of probably about 350 or so animals left on the planet. At one time they were very abundant in the North Atlantic, and probably more concerning is of those animals, only about 75 or so are actually adult breeding females. Current prognosis is basically extinction unless something pretty dramatically changes, and there are a lot of threats, including ship strikes and also potentially fishery interactions as well. The primary problem is there's too much gear in the water, and they're interacting with gear to a great extent in the Northeast, and that has to be reduced. That mortality has to be reduced. We respond to animals that are entangled in fishing gear and ultimately retrieve all the gear off of it and give the whale a chance. These management actions both reducing the amount of gear in the water, or reducing entanglements of right whales, as well as reducing mortality associated with ship and boat collisions are the primary things we have to do to recover the population. A lot of the work we do with individual species like loggerhead sea turtles and right whales, really those are species that are telling us a story. And the story is, as humans, we've had an effect on the system. Really, our ultimate focus is on that system. And all the things we do to protect them are to protect the overall system, which ultimately we as humans, as biological organisms, rely on as well. Just the way you live your daily life affects habitat and the whole ecosystem upon which we all depend. So the cars that you drive, the food that you eat, all those things affect the ecosystem, both the terrestrial and the aquatic ecosystems that species like loggerheads rely on.